Hi, in this video we will be talking about Land of Open Graves from chapters 8 to 10. So the author so far told us about the immigrant experience from very different angles. He first provided us with a theoretical framework to understand the desert as a space of exception, in which the immigrants are stripped of their humanities and rights, which means that there's no consequence for the harm inflicted upon them. Remember our discussions of Giorgio Agamben and state of exception and space of exception and the bare life. So if you want, you can refer to earlier chapters. As far as I remember, it was chapter 2, to have a better sense of space and state of exception. And then he moved on to a forensic experiment with pigs in chapter 3 to discuss what happens to the dead bodies in the desert, and introduced to us the concepts necropolitics and necroviolence to connect the death of immigrants to politics and political power. So this part is important. This part tells us about the political aspect of death and how politics of death is a way to produce and reproduce political power and sovereignty. So for more details, check chapter 3. And then we read how we should understand the desert as a crucial part of the immigration policy of the United States. How the whole desert and every being in the desert become an ally to the United States immigration policy through a whole different understanding of agency. We talked about agency in Live and Die Like a Man and through other works and articles. And this book provides us with a whole different understanding of agency. So in order to have more information, check Hybrid Collective, so you can get a better sense of what does Jason DeLeon understand from agency, not isolated in human beings, but rather the connections and the relationship between humans and non-human actants. Now we read about the Mexican side of the border, the shelter, getting ready, and political economy of immigration, buying stuff like immigrants buying stuff on one hand, on the other hand, the United States immigration agencies like Border Patrol and so on, and also the court cases, deportation, how they all become profitable businesses. Then we read a little bit about Memo and Lucho and their successful journey. And now it is time to talk about some stories from Central American immigrants, which unfortunately ended up with their disappearance. So, as you remember, the author, with a group of students, are exposed to Maricela's body in the desert when they were doing research, when they were conducting some field work. They found Maricela's body, and for more details you can refer to the chapters. But basically he discusses the ethics of taking photographs and publishing them to show us the real consequences of the immigration policy and how the desert has been weaponized by the United States government. And also, just like he repeatedly told us about, once the desert is turned into a weapon and an ally of the United States immigration policy, then the United States does not have to take any blame of the death of the immigrants on one hand, and on the other hand, when the death happens in some invisible places like the desert, then it is as if it doesn't happen at all. So when the death is not visible, then it is as if it doesn't exist for us. And the immigrants are robbed of their dignities through these processes, and the author basically tries to convey it. Is it ethically okay? Is it ethically wrong? It is you to decide, but the author makes a good discussion about the ethics of publishing these photographs. So I'm not going into too much detail of Christian's story. He left his country, he left his home country, hometown, to move to United States. He goes through a lot of stuff that you can find the details in the book. But in this part, the author, Jason DeLeon, tries to show us how complex Hybrid Collective is. And there's not one Hybrid Collective. While the desert and the United States part has its own dynamics, it is also related to other dynamics in Central America and Mexico as well. So he says that the Mexican Hybrid Collective is also capable of producing its own unique forms of necroviolence. It also can lead us to question what is a border, because as we see in this work and in so many other works, the United States government has been practicing their sovereignty in Mexican borders, within Mexican borders and Central American borders as well, and they also just exacerbate the violence inflicted upon the undocumented immigrants. Then we get to Christian's house that was built by the money he sends from New York City. He hasn't ever been to this house, and nobody actually knows if he ever will be able to see that house. But they've been building it, they've been buying furnitures, they've been organizing it and keeping it clean for Christian, with a possibility of him going back home. So this can also teach us a bit about transnational family dynamics and the impact of immigration on these dynamics. So Christian most probably will never be able to get back home, although it is his home. So where is his home is a complicated story, but I think it is interesting to see a house belonging to someone. Everybody knows, everybody accepts that it belongs to Christian, but nobody knows if Christian will ever make it or not to that house, because, you know, if he goes back, then he is undocumented. He cannot just get back to the United States. He has to go through all these dangerous processes that he already went through once. And now we are in Maricela's death. So Jason DeLeon and his students, his assistants, found Maricela's body, and then he followed up on this as much as he could, as best as he could, and he and with the support of all these forensic people, they were able to identify Maricela. They were able to identify the body, and then he follows up. He goes to her hometown, conducts interviews and research with her family, her kids, and so on. And basically, he makes this argument: Maricela has transformed from being an anonymous body into a human being through her death. In Christian case, we saw that humans have been, the undocumented immigrants are dehumanized through transforming into cargoes to be transported by any cost instead of human beings. But Maricela's death, after he died, her humanity is recognized by the governments, and her body was transformed to her home country as a human being. So the burial rituals and the Catholic death rituals could be done by her family, and also they could go through the mourning process collectively, that we will be talking about ambiguous loss in the next video. But the humanization and the dehumanization process is very complex in this scene. Undocumented immigrants, I'm repeating myself, are dehumanized through transformation into cargoes to be transported by any cost, instead of human beings with dignities. And only after identification of Maricela's body, her humanity is recognized by the United States government and also her home country. So she turns back into a human being again through, unfortunately, her death. And it is how the United States immigration policy works, dehumanizing undocumented immigrants until they are found and identified, not until they die. Their dehumanization moves on after they died, as we discussed in necroviolence. But only if they can be identified, then their humanities possibly can be recognized by the governments officially. So these chapters have been showing us about the devastating impacts on the desert, not only to the undocumented immigrants, but also their families. And it will connect to the following chapters, particularly chapter 11 and 12. So I'll see you in the next video.